Hello, my name is Gigi Rojan, and on behalf of the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program and FEMA's National Earthquake Technical Assistance Program, welcome to this free training series on FEMA P-1000, Safer, Stronger, Smarter, a guide to improving school natural hazard safety. Our two instructors for this series are Barry Welliver and Lori Peak. Barry Welliver is a structural engineer with BHW Engineers in Draper, Utah, and Lori Peak is a professor of sociology and director of the Natural Hazard Center at the University of Colorado Boulder. Both Lori and Barry were part of the team of experts that developed the FEMA P-1000 report. This series of videos about FEMA P-1000 will describe important concepts on natural hazard school safety, provide guidance on what to do before, during, and after an event, and will discuss how to make your facility safer from natural hazards. In this video, which is the first of 6 modules outlined here, Barry and Lori will provide an introduction to the FEMA P-1000 report and highlight why school natural hazard safety is so important. Each module in this training series has its own set of valuable topics, and you are highly encouraged to watch all of them. With that, Barry, let's get started.
Thanks, Gigi. Let's briefly go through each of the 6 modules so that you become familiar with the content. So the first module is this introductory one, which we're looking at today. This is the overview of the guide and why school natural hazard safety matters. It really is, we're looking at the natural hazard impacts on schools, including the issues that school administrators and local state officials might need to consider. We'll also give a summary of how to use the manual in general. We'll also discuss some of the big reasons that schools need to be a priority in the natural hazard safety, including some big picture ideas. In the second module, identifying relevant natural hazards, making school buildings safer, this section will start by giving an overview and description of the characteristics of each of the hazards that are covered in this guide, including a brief description of where they occur, their frequency and occurrence and intensity, warning times, duration, and any follow-on hazards. It is also will also provide an overview of the level of safety expected and provided by building codes for school buildings. In Module 3, Planning School Emergency Response and Disaster Recovery provides an overview of the purpose and description of the recommended process for developing an emergency operations plan. We'll also cover important aspects to consider while trying to get students and staff back into school buildings. In Module 4, Engaging the Whole Community and Moving Forward, this section will give an overview of the whole community approach and the role that schools play, guidance on engaging community partners, including professionals, local government, community organizations, parents, students, and why their partnership is so important. Will also help in identifying challenges and opportunities to keep school safety moving forward, things such as budgetary constraints, lack of coordination, and the like. The final 2 modules, number 5, Supplemental Technical Guidance, really is a section where we dive more deeply into each of the hazards covered in the guide. These include resources to identify key elements for specific hazard vulnerability assessment and building design and mitigation options. It also includes information to help you integrate the hazard into your emergency operations plan. And finally, funding resources. This final module will help summarize some of the important funding resources available, including a new federal program which became available shortly after the publication of this guide. So let's begin with Module 1, which gives an overview of FEMA P-1000 guidebook and ask the question, why does school hazard safety matter? But first, let's talk about the training objectives for these series. Of course, we want to introduce you to the FEMA P-1000 guidebook and how to use it, but we also want to encourage the idea of locally specific thinking about natural hazards and school safety, and create actionable steps for identifying natural hazards impacting schools, making existing and new school buildings safer from natural hazards, planning for emergency response and short and long-term recovery, and engaging the whole community in the school safety actions. This guidebook was developed by a multidisciplinary team of experts who believe that the need for a comprehensive document to move school safety forward was necessary. The scope is primarily focused on U.S. schools, and the team members were selected to represent a broad cross-section of our nation. We relied on feedback from experts in the field and tried to make this as user-friendly as we knew how. Hopefully, this will be a wealth of information in one place that will advance the efforts of those who advocate for safe schools. In many ways, this guide is about making school buildings safer, but it's also about schools as institutions. Schools as institutions are absolutely integral to the health, the vitality, and the well-being of young people, families, communities, and the nation. Schools are central to the concept of resilience described in the mantra, jobs, schools, and housing, each a key element affecting recovery of communities. And schools, well, they contain the future of our nation. Schools are important, but they're also vulnerable. In the United States, school buildings are the only high occupancy public buildings other than prisons and courthouses whose inhabitants are compelled by legal mandate to be inside them. Perhaps because children are required to attend school by law, the general public often perceives school buildings as possessing good resistance to natural hazards. However, school buildings can be more vulnerable to damage to natural hazards than other types of buildings. What are some of the gaps that this guide is trying to address? Well, one, this guide complements the 2013 Guide for Developing High-Quality School Emergency Operations Plans, which was developed by the U.S. Department of Education in partnership with FEMA, Homeland Security, and other federal agencies. It provides information for K through 12 schools to develop a comprehensive strategy for addressing multiple hazards. And it's intended to help build resilient communities through creating safer schools and protecting children and school staff. Why is the guide needed? We recognize that natural hazards endanger the lives of children and staff and increase emotional trauma and the result of long-term harm to children and communities. This guide integrates hazard-specific information for schools into one document and addresses the three pillars of safe schools. One, to have safe learning facilities. Two, to develop school disaster management plans. And three, to provide risk reduction and resilience education. Our framework was to develop comprehensive guidance for courses of action taken before a natural hazard event, during the hazard emergency, and after the emergency has ended. Who are some of the intended audiences? Well, the primary audiences intended for this document are the school administrators, facility managers, emergency planning committees, teachers, and staff at public K through 12 schools, and school board members. Secondary audience, however, is parents, caregivers, and students. The guidebook's broken into three basic sections. The first section, which contains the seven chapters that you see in the center there under content, is recommended for all persons to read. This is an overview of the key components of the comprehensive school approach for school natural hazard safety. The second section is the hazard-specific supplements, and you can see the hazards that we're going to cover there in the content. This is the more detailed information and guidance which focuses specifically on those hazards. Then lastly, the appendices includes more detailed information about both earthquake and flood maps, and then a section on resources that we're providing for you. And with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Lori Peak.
Thank you so much, Barry. Now I'm going to share a little bit about the big why that drove the development of this guidebook. Every day in the United States, an estimated 50 million school children enter some 99,000 public schools across the nation. Many of these children in the schools they attend are at extreme risk to natural hazards. But until the release of this guidebook, we did not have comprehensive guidance for school natural hazard safety in our nation. Safer, Stronger, Smarter aims to address this gap and to ensure that all children are safe and have an equal opportunity to learn. One of the core values that brought our guidebook development team together, the team that Barry described previously, was the belief that children not only have the right to an education, they also have the right to an education in a safe environment. Although many people share this commitment to ensuring that children attend schools in a safe environment, the reality is that millions of children across the nation attend schools in locations at high risk to tsunami, earthquake, flood, tornado, and many other natural hazard events. Consider, for example, that after a megaquake, children at Long Beach Elementary in Washington State would have just 20 minutes to run to higher ground. Reporters at the Seattle Times asked a local track athlete to see if he could make it before the tsunami. We're going to now watch a brief video that details how this young runner fared in the tsunami scenario. As harrowing as that video is, it is important to remember that more than 31,000 students in Washington state alone attend schools like Long Beach that are in or near tsunami danger zones, according to the Seattle Times analysis of state-level data. Across Washington state, roughly 386,000 pupils, 1 in every 3 enrolled in school, live in earthquake-prone areas and attend schools built before seismic construction standards were adopted statewide. There are many, many children in our nation who similarly are at risk to natural hazards. And again, we came together to develop this guidebook because we believe that a comprehensive document for school administrators and staff would help improve overall school safety. The guidebook provides both operational guidance, including what to do before, during, and after an event. And it also includes extensive information on physical protection. What can be done to a structure and facility to improve safety for students and staff? There are several goals that we were seeking to achieve in developing this comprehensive approach to school natural hazard safety. These include enhancing safety through minimizing casualties and injuries, encouraging emotional well-being through trauma reduction through damage minimization, ensuring educational continuity, because we know that well-constructed and prepared schools can prevent or minimize occupancy disruption. We also wanted to encourage users to think about the savings and benefits of engaging in a comprehensive approach to school safety. Consider, for example, that money spent before a natural hazard to mitigate risk is a good investment. Various studies have shown that for every $1 invested before a disaster can save anywhere from $4 to $11 in post-disaster costs. We also know that schools are often sources of emergency shelter after a disaster. And because of this, we want to make sure that schools are prepared. And then finally, and importantly, this guide also focuses on speeding community recovery, because we know when students can't attend school, parents may have a much harder time going back to work and helping the community as a whole to get back on its feet. So I want to close out my remarks today by summarizing 6 of the big picture takeaway messages that we hope any reader or user of the guidebook would walk away with. And so big picture takeaway number 1. We know that children are especially physically, emotionally, as well as educationally vulnerable in disasters. Yet they are often overlooked, despite the fact that there are nearly 75 million children in the United States today, and again, some 50 million children who attend our nation's schools. Children compose nearly 1/4 of the total population of the United States, but they don't always have a voice in decisions that are made about their lives. And so it's very important for adults who are in decision-making and leadership roles to consider children's special needs as well as their capacities. A second big picture takeaway of the guidebook is that we know that we are all living at risk in the United States, and by many accounts, the risks are escalating due to climate change related disasters and other issues. Consider, for example, a 2012 report from the advocacy group Save the Children, which found that 94% of children in the United States live in communities at risk to disasters. Or consider a more recently released study that found that 90% of counties in the United States suffered at least one severe weather disaster between the years 2011 and 2021. And some of those counties endured as many as 12 federally declared disasters during that time period. Those disaster survivors represent some 93% of the country's population, or about 300 million people who were affected by disaster. So again, a key point of this guidebook is that we're all living at risk, but we also don't want to lose sight of the fact that that risk is not always shared proportionally. And we know that children of color and low-income children, as well as children from other marginalized backgrounds, oftentimes live in contexts or communities where they have the hardest time preparing for, responding to, and recovering from disasters. And so for that reason, in this guidebook, while we offer general guidance throughout the book, we always try to remind readers to ensure that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't always work, and to take these important differences into account. Big picture takeaway number 3. The risks that children face are obviously not only an effect of the natural environment. The risks that children face is amplified by crumbling physical infrastructure and unequal allocation of financial and social resources. Consider, for example, that one of the nation's leading and most respected engineering groups, the American Society of Civil Engineers, regularly assigns school infrastructure a less than passing grade. Most recently, they received a D+ on their annual infrastructure report card. A fourth big picture takeaway of the guidebook is that there have been many close call events in our nation's schools, as well as many actualized disasters that have caused great harm and suffering. So of those close call, or what are sometimes called near miss events, a couple of recent examples. In 2011, Joplin, Missouri experienced a major EF5 tornado that touched down on a Sunday. That tornado blew through the town, where about 7,500 children attend various schools scattered throughout the community. The tornado ultimately flattened the high school in Joplin, where some 2,000 students attended that school every school day. It also destroyed a middle school and several elementary schools. Had that disaster, which claimed 161 lives, occurred during a school day, the loss of life may have been even more catastrophic for that community. Another close call event were the 2016 West Virginia flash floods that occurred on June 23rd, 2016. The rainfall on that day and in the days leading up caused rivers to overflow, and city streets, homes, businesses, and local schools were inundated. Had that event not occurred during the summer months, the disruptions to school children's education would have been profound. So those are a couple of close call events that get at exactly, get communities oftentimes thinking about what could happen in the event of a major disaster. But again, it's important for all of us to pause and reflect and think about, have we had such an event in our community, a near miss or a close call that could have led to devastating consequences? And then to pause and ask, what could be done now to ensure if such an event happens again, that we don't leave that event feeling just fortunate that it wasn't, quote, worse than it even was. In addition to those near miss events, we also, again, know that many schools have been and continue to be directly impacted by disasters every year. A recent study from NIST found that an average of 24 schools each year are hit by a tornado. And in some instances, those events turn deadly. For example, on May 20th, 2013, a 2-mile wide EF5 tornado struck the Oklahoma City suburb of Moore and killed 24 people, including 9 school children, and caused an estimated $9 billion in property damage. One of the schools, Plaza Towers Elementary, where several of the school children perished, did not have a tornado shelter available. A fifth big picture takeaway: the sorts of natural hazards that Barry and I have been describing in this particular module are inevitable. They're part of our natural environment and part of our natural world. But one of the points that we underscore in the guidebook is that while natural hazards are inevitable, disasters are not. And so let's use a case example to drive that point home. Consider these 2 earthquakes: the December 7th, 1988 Armenian earthquake, which was a magnitude 6.9 event, and the October 17th, 1989 Loma Prieta, California earthquake, also a magnitude 6.9. 2 natural hazard events that shared much in common, but the disastrous impacts were very different based on the political, social environments and the condition of the built environment. So in Armenia, the affected areas had a population of about 400,000 people. The earthquake led to some 25,000 deaths, including the loss of life among some 6,000 school children who were killed when their school buildings collapsed. 500,000 buildings were destroyed, including 900 schools. Contrast that with the effects of the Loma Prieta earthquake, where San Francisco had a population of about 343,000 at the time of the event. And there were 63 deaths in that earthquake, but of course, far fewer deaths than in the Armenian earthquake. No school buildings collapsed, and much of that performance of the school buildings has been attributed to the passage of the 1933 Field Act in California, which helped to ensure safe school building construction in the many decades that followed. The asterisk, though, is there to remind us that physical infrastructure is regularly decaying, and that we can't assume that the past will also be a complete predictor for the future. So this doesn't mean that all school buildings are completely safe, especially in a larger magnitude earthquake. And that's why action and continual assessment is so important to ensure that those natural hazards don't become human disasters. Sixth and final big picture takeaway is that there are actions we can take before, during, and after disaster to enhance resilience for children, school staff, and school buildings. We do not believe that natural hazards have to turn into human tragedies, and this guidebook is organized around various actionable steps that can be taken at various levels to try to reduce the harm and suffering caused by disasters. And so with that, Barry and I want to thank you for your time and attention today. And I'm going to turn it back over to our moderator, Gigi, now to see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for sharing the background and purpose of this guide. Barry, you served as the project technical director for the development of FEMA P-1000, and Lori, you were the social scientist who served on the project management committee. Can you both share why you said yes when you were invited to develop FEMA P-1000?
Sure, Gigi, thanks for the question. I guess I've been on a long road of pursuing school safety over my career, and it started when I moved to California in the early 70s after I graduated on the East Coast. I experienced well, actually, it was the 1933 Field Act that Lori mentioned that caused me to understand that school safety in California was a primary interest. And so carrying that forward, I thought, as I moved to Utah in 1995 and began to see many unreinforced masonry buildings, I was thinking of Utah as maybe a pre-1933 California population where we hadn't experienced that, and the devastating effects potentially because some of those school buildings in Utah were unreinforced masonry. In 2014, I was invited to attend a workshop at the National Conference of Earthquake Engineering in Anchorage, Alaska. And they invited, the people they invited to this workshop had to make a commitment, not only to be there at the workshop, but to devote at least a couple of years in pursuing school safety. And so they started, the moderator started, the facilitator started the session by asking the question, why are you here? And my answer to that question was, I don't want to be on the other side of an earthquake and have somebody tell me that you didn't tell me how dangerous these school buildings could be. That would be devastating for me. So naturally, in years following, when this FEMA P-1000 project became on my sites or was available to be joined, I said, yes, count me in. This is something I want to be involved with. Not only was it speaking to the dangers of earthquakes, but multiple hazards which I had never really envisioned before. And also just getting back to the roots of having a complete comprehensive guide. And so I wholeheartedly joined this effort. So thank you for that.
Great, Barry, thank you for sharing your motivation and for all of your leadership in the development of FEMA P-1000. Lori, will you now share what motivated you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Gigi. And I just also wanted to thank Barry for all the great leadership on this guide. My story is somewhat different than Barry's, and it involves a hurricane and research directly with children. After Hurricane Katrina happened in 2005, my colleague and fellow sociologist Alice Fothergill and I embarked on a nearly decade-long study of children in Hurricane Katrina. And in our work that emerged from that research, we were really tracing what influenced children's recovery in the aftermath of that disaster. And we kept learning more and more and more about the vital role that schools played in children's lives, but also in their parents' lives. And we also learned a lot about the disruption that ensued when children were out of school, oftentimes not just for days or even weeks, but sometimes for months or even years did they find their education disrupted after that terrible disaster. And so we wrapped up our book in 2015. And soon after that, the Applied Technology Council called and asked if I might be willing to get involved in this project and to provide a social science perspective of, really looking at the people within the school buildings that we were trying to make sure were safe. And I did not hesitate to say yes to the invitation because I was just so excited about this thought of working together with engineers and school administrators and risk communicators and others who all came from different backgrounds, but all shared that common concern of making sure that children have a safe place to learn. And so that's sort of my background and story that brought me to this project. And I'm so thankful to have been a part of it.
We're so glad you joined, Lori.
Thank you,
It's
Barry.
wonderful to have you on the team for sure.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lori, for sharing and also for all of your service to schools over the decades. All right, so this concludes training module 1, an introduction to FEMA P-1000. In the next module, module 2, Barry will discuss identifying relevant natural hazards and making school buildings safer. We hope to see you there.